So I
Okay.
guess I could have done the introduction after that, but welcome to the inaugural Asia Pacific community call. Like I said, it's good to see everybody. And today I think we'll have kind of a fairly low overhead introduction. In the chat of the Zoom, we have the shared meeting minutes.
Okay.
And so if you could just log in and jot down your name as an attendee.
I think you have to hit the chat screen at the bottom, the chat button at the bottom of Zoom sometimes
Yep.
now.
And just the university or organization that you are representing. I have a variety. All right. So today I thought we'd just start this meeting by just welcoming everybody, greeting everybody, kind of giving you an overview of the CHAOSS project. Then I think it might be nice to spend a little bit of time agenda setting. So kind of what the new people on the call are interested in and what you'd like to talk about and what you think might be important. So anything else people want to add to the agenda? All right. So folks can chime in as they would like to. So this doesn't have to just be me talking the entire time. So I'll start with the CHAOSS overview. Right. So the aim of CHAOSS, it's kind of far-reaching at this point. So I think briefly the aim of CHAOSS is to, I always say, provide transparency and actionability around open source community health. So as different organizations have an interest in the open source that's in their organizations or being released as part of their organizational strategy, understanding the health of those open source engagements is pretty important. And so the CHAOSS project is kind of one of the, I would like to say, important projects trying to aim to uncover health-related issues in these situations. So anybody want to add anything, Dawn or Sean, who have been in this for a while?
I think that's a good summary.
Yeah, it's the highest level. So hold on just a second. So in order to get this done, we have a pretty broad group of people. So that's the aim. If somebody could, Sean, could you jot down some of these notes?
Yeah, I sure can.
Okay. So from a community perspective, I think you can even just see from the guest list that's on here, we have a number of different people representing kind of a number of different corners, or come at the CHAOSS project with a variety of different interests. So we have, for example, Dawn, who's on this call, who is from Pivotal, now VMware. We have folks from Huawei. You can see folks from universities. Honestly, the interest comes from funding agencies. The interest comes from foundations, open source foundations. So there are a lot of organizations that have an expressed interest in understanding open source community health. I would say that the different organizations have generally the same goals in understanding health. Deep down contextually, it might be a little bit different. But fundamentally, understanding community health seems to be fairly consistent across all of these organizations, which I think is super helpful because it makes the conversations pretty normal in our meetings. So for example, we don't have Sean looking at it one way and Don looking at it a different way, and open source foundations looking at it a third way, and we have these very divergent sets of ways of looking at open source community health. The challenge is that I don't think any of us have it fully specified. I wish we did, but there's no just straightforward playbook in terms of understanding open source community health. So that's what the project is all about. So community-wise, I'd say we have, gosh, I mean, probably well over 100 people that participate in a variety of different ways whether it's from the events, whether it's working in metrics, whether it's working in software. So it's a pretty healthy group of people. So that's kind of the community in a nutshell, right? The CHAOSS project is probably best considered to be built around a couple different things. One is the software and the other is the metrics. So I guess I'll start with the metrics, even though they're reversed on the list. The metrics themselves, so what we're doing is we're identifying metrics that help improve the transparency of open source community health. Mute. Hold on a second. And so the metrics are being advanced across 5 different working groups at the moment. And those 5 different working groups are risk, evolution, diversity and inclusion, value, and common. All right, and so within the working groups, the aim is to identify and develop metrics, not necessarily the deployment of those metrics, but to develop the definition of metrics that help improve transparency around, say, risk, or improve transparency around diversity and inclusion. And so each of the working groups, I wouldn't say they work in isolation, but they work kind of focused on the metrics that are relevant to those areas of interest. Right? So far, so good? Looking at other people on the call. Summary, nods are good. All right. The metrics work, I would say, has been going on, all the work has been going on for about 2 or 3 years now. And the current set of metrics can be found at
The CHAOSS link.
Yep, the CHAOSS webpage link. So
I'll get it in there.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll put it in the chat as well. Oops. All right, so this link, the CHAOSS community metrics link, is the definitive set of metrics that have been released by the CHAOSS community. Full stop. So the work that's done in the working groups occurs in GitHub. And within that work, you may see metrics, say, for example, Sean is participating in the risk working group and Don is participating or leading the common working group. There's going to be work that they're doing that isn't necessarily part of the release yet. So you have to really rely on this list that I just put in the chat and Sean put in the meeting minutes. But this is the definitive list of metrics, of CHAOSS metrics at the moment. And I would say that the list is much larger on GitHub, but many of those are in various states of development. So this needs to be kind of abundantly clear, because I think this does create some confusion that there's a list of metrics on the web page and then there's a list of metrics in the GitHub repositories. Yes, they're related, but the GitHub repos represent the work in progress and the web page represents the released list. All right, so you can take a look at those. We have processes by which we do releases. So from development within the working group on a new metric to an open period for community feedback on that metric, and then ultimately getting it onto the web page. So all of these are fairly, I'd say fairly well articulated processes, or at least we're getting them there. So the workflow should be fairly straightforward. So for anybody on this call, I don't know that the call would be to participate in every working group, just because that would take a lot of time and a lot of meeting, but to identify a working group that's of interest to you. So if diversity and inclusion is an issue that's near and dear to you or important for your organization, participate in the diversity and inclusion working group, which has its own meeting time and its own GitHub repository and its own set of metrics that it's releasing. If risk is important to you, then participate in risk. So That would probably be my initial recommendation. Don't go into every working group. It would just be too much, probably, just in terms of a time commitment. All right.
And then the one thing that I just want to add is that the working groups really are focused on defining metrics. So this is really not about writing code to gather the metrics. A lot of the work that we do within the working groups is about defining how we should measure something. So really anyone can participate in the working groups. So if if you're normally writing documentation, or if you're normally doing, things other than development, you can certainly engage in the working groups. I mean, they're great for developers too. And certainly the software working groups are a little more focused on development, but anybody can help us define these metrics. It's really good to have additional perspective. So how you, or maybe your company, or maybe your region looks at a particular metric and how you might define it. We found that varies quite a bit with different perspectives. So it's good to have more and more people involved and engaged in defining some of these metrics.
Mm-hmm. Totally excellent point. And I'll kind of, listening to you talk, I'll even add on to that. I mean, I can't say that there's ever been a time that an individual representing themselves or an organization wanted to develop a metric, and we have ever said, no, that's not a metric that is worthy to be defined. Sometimes we have to find where it fits best in which working group. But to Don's point, we're very open to the number of different perspectives. So if folks, say from Huawei, have a metric that they think would be useful in improving transparency on health, bring it forward and we'll work to develop that, because that may be useful to other organizations as well. So, okay, cool, thank you. Sean, did you want to add anything, or are you good?
I think I'm good. I think there's two main software groups that are working on implementing the metrics, and Grimoire Lab is one and Augur is the other. I'm active with the Augur project myself, but they both have different strengths.
Yep. So to Sean's point, right? So the metrics, then what we do is in the CHAOSS project, we don't want to just have metrics for metrics' sake. So just developing the definitions of a metric is excellent, but we'd like to see those metrics provide meaningful real-time data for folks, right? So that you can make decisions. And at the moment, within the CHAOSS project, there are, I would say, two very active software tools that are focused on the deployment of the CHAOSS metrics, as well as perhaps some other metrics that haven't been defined yet within the CHAOSS project. And to Sean's point, those two are Grimoire Lab and Augur, and they are two different sets of software, both aiming at deploying the metrics, and they have different approaches as to how they do that. So some of you may or may not have seen some of these tools, and if you're interested more in the development of software, I would suggest participating in either the Grimoire Lab call and Grimoire Lab efforts, or the Augur call and the Augur efforts. Again, both aimed at deploying the metrics that are defined within the CHAOSS project. Good. Then I guess I'll add too that there are certain metrics that are not easily deployable via software. So for example, within diversity and inclusion, many of those metrics can't be gathered simply from trace data or electronic trace, like GitHub repository activity. So the CHAOSS project also works on processes that allow us to capture metrics that may not be deployable via software. So for example, we have a diversity and inclusion badging program, which is more of a somewhat automated, but more of a human process to identify the metrics, that events or open source projects are looking to reveal. So we're constantly, the point is we're constantly working on processes to make sure that all of the metrics that are deployed in CHAOSS see the light of day. Good. All right. Good. So that's honestly, I think that's 15, 20 minutes of CHAOSS as an overview. So without going into too much detail, maybe I'll stop here for a second and see if folks have questions or would like to make comments, or even if you've tried to approach the CHAOSS project via the website or via some other form and you've had problems, because that would be great to know what those problems might be. So I'll kind of leave it open for just a second.
Okay. May I have a question? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question to Don Foster. Okay. I know you organize the common work group, and we are in Huawei. We are very interested in our open source project. Who contribute for our project? You know, we don't want we have the element factor, just ourselves to contribute to the project. We want more and more organization and company to communicate to contribute with us together. So we can collect the data from their email, commit ID email, and we can't recognize who and which organize they work for. And I know, Don, you just from Twitter to VMware, and do you have some function some can work out it, because some of we must follow the GDPR, you know, the privacy, the people's privacy. We don't so we only have their name and their email ID. So how can we recognize where organization as the contributor come from? Do you have any idea about it? Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I think that you've identified something that I think is one of the hardest things to define, because so many people use multiple email addresses, they use personal Gmail addresses, and it can be quite difficult actually to find the organizational affiliation for a lot of these people. So we do have an organizational affiliation metric defined within Common that provides some suggestions, and both of the tools have Augur and Grimoire Labs have tools that help with this. So Grimoire has a tool called Sorting Hat, which helps you combine identities. You can combine them based on names. You can combine them based on an email address. It has some different ways of doing that, and that can help with some things. I've noticed this actually being particularly challenging actually with people in China, because a lot of them use multiple names. So they use some of their Git configurations have their Chinese name. Some of them have the name that they use with English speakers. So I've also noticed that can be quite challenging. And Sean, maybe you can chime in, because I know that you have some tools within Augur that do this as well.
Yeah, so what Augur does is it relies on the email address that's in the Git log, and that's publicly shared in the Git log. And we use GitHub and GitLab, and probably in the future Bitbucket, to basically query to see what the user ID is for a particular email. We can't ask it for all of the emails for a user ID, but we can say, hey, we have this email in a commit, can you, or in a issue, usually it's in a commit, can you tell us what your user ID is for that person? And so through that, we're able to map them to what we call a canonical user. So we have an aliases table that maps different email addresses to the same canonical user, but we don't yet have any way for you to say which email you want to be the canonical one. The canonical one is the first one we find in the commit log. So it's a little bit accidental. And when we find, and for organizational affiliation, generally we have we've actually, as an organization, CHAOSS is building a list of corporate and project top level domain names. So like google.com or yahoo-inc.com, all resolved to those corporations. And when a person makes a commit with a new affiliation, we make a change in affiliation the first time we find that new corporate email in their Git log or in the APIs that GitLab and GitHub return. So that's imprecise. I think there's ways to explicitly assign people a corporate affiliation as well, but we haven't ourselves made that easy to say what day it happens on. It's just we go by the first contribution.
Yeah, and also if a lot of the people who participate in the project that you're measuring also participate in CNCF projects, the CNCF has a really good organizational affiliation mapping, and I'll drop a link to that in the notes. I just need to go look for it. So that can be another source you can use.
And that's by email. And
so King, I did drop a few links in the chat. I think Donald put the Git DM from CNCF in there as well. But as Sean pointed out, there's a brand new effort in this JSON file to best track organizational affiliation, not down to the person level, which from what I understand is okay with GDPR. Is that right?
From what I understand, Git logs have been explicitly excluded right now from GDPR.
Okay.
They're considered publicly available data, but as you'll hear on the Grimoire Lab podcast that will air, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks probably, it's always a topic of discussion. So if you're deploying inside of your organization one of these tools, I think you have more latitude than if you're deploying outside of an organizational context, because inside of an organizational context, effectively you have some kind of work relationship with the person, and resolving their identity isn't a public matter ever. It's the general practice of respecting GDPR while also understanding that everybody's giving away their emails and Git logs. And I think one of the main reasons GDPR exists is because of targeted advertising and the betrayal of privacy by content-oriented sites. And since most software work happens at the command line, they haven't yet found a way to serve ads to Git users. And for that reason, I don't think software developers using Git are, as of yet, targets of the ad industry. So through our Git logs. And that way, I think we certainly want to follow the spirit and intent of any laws that any government passes, but it's a moving target.
Okay, does that help?
Yeah, it's very help. I think the information from public available is not about the GDPRs. For example, the linking information, we can get the API from linking, and because most of the contributor use in China, they use QQ email, and in American they use Gmail. So I think it's and the CNCF is best practice is for us. We can learn from it. Thank you. Don Foster, thank you, Sam.
I'll add to it does seem like, looking at the CNCF Git DM and the organizational affiliation JSON, that it does appear that there's just human effort involved as well.
Absolutely. People are willingly maintaining their own identifying emails on that list.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it's a choice that people are making, and they know that it's public when they do it.
But in addition to that, they have some other sources. So like their CLA system affiliates people with organizations. So like VMware has a corporate CLA with the CNCF. So I'm under that one, and so because I'm under that legal agreement, they know that I worked for Pivotal and now VMware. So I think they also use some of that data as well to match people. I'm not 100% sure, but I think they do.
What is a CLA, Dawn?
A corporate license agreement. So it's a lot of times what projects will have in place is that you have to sign a license agreement that just says that you're freely giving them the software and that you abide by the rules in the CLA.
Yeah, some of the Chinese project, open source project, we must send the CLA.
It's pretty common.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you. King, too, if you're looking at kind of pursuing this, I might recommend that you join perhaps one of the software working group calls, so Grimoire Lab or Augur, which could, I think, help in answering questions about the deployment and making this information visible to you. And those meetings are often, I mean, they're open to answer these types of questions. They're not, the Grimoire Lab and Augur calls are not just there to only focus on advancing the software, period. It's to provide an open platform by which people can ask questions in terms of how they can do things with the software.
Okay. Thank you. Cool.
Any other questions? I think before we move to agenda setting that folks may have.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Frank. And as far as I know, I think CNCS also use some online services to match the identity data of different people, different contributor, maybe. And actually, I want to introduce myself first. I'm a PhD student from China and majored in computer science and very interested in open source. And I used to work for Alibaba OSPO on community digitalization. And actually last year, I gave my speech about my work on open source summit at Shanghai. And that's where I met Kate Stewart, I think. And she introduced me about the CHAOSS project. And I had a great talk with Brian Profit from Red Hat. And he also gave a speech about community metrics on the conference. And I believe that they are both in CHAOSS board, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for great works you've done. And I have two questions here. The first one is, actually, in the last meeting, you said that there are too many kinds of communities and they cannot use identical metrics to measure their healthy status. So is there any plan to give open source projects or communities classification, like defines categories and identify community automatically or manually?
I think from a CHAOSS perspective, we have we've long maintained a position of agnosticism about assigning value. So is your metric score good or bad? We rely on the software team's context, the people running it or interested in it, to define relative health of projects using the metrics. There are research efforts underway that Matt and I's research groups to try to categorize patterns of behavior in projects, so that projects where people are committing and creating issues and commenting on things in statistically similar ways, we can show that, but our aim isn't to make a value judgment about what's better and what's not better, because there's a lot of ways of assessing health, as you noted.
Yeah, this is one thing I'm talking about a lot internally with my colleagues at VMware as well, is that, we have projects that operate differently than others. So I have kind of a standard set of project health metrics, and occasionally someone gets concerned because they're like, oh, well, you know, my project isn't healthy because the way that you're measuring this doesn't make sense for my project. And from my perspective, that's fine. Your project is different, and we just need to recognize that. But in a lot of cases, you know, from my standpoint, looking outside in, I'm looking at a couple hundred open source projects when I do my health measurements, and so I don't necessarily know if something is really, you know, maybe not performing well, or maybe they measure things differently. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is, you know, talk to some of these projects and understand how they operate so that we can understand how to interpret the metrics. So I think what we try to do with the CHAOSS project is we try to come up with how you might measure something. But I think in a lot of cases, because some of these communities are different, I think how you interpret the results is really what changes. Because in a lot of cases, you can measure something, you know, similar ways, or you can, you know, use some of the same metrics. But how you interpret them, I think, is going to be different depending on the type of project and what's important to that project.
Okay, thank you. I understand. So case by case is the yearly way to do this, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
At this point, I mean, if somebody can come up with a really clever way of doing that, we're all ears for sure. But I think at this point, we are kind of interpreting things on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, understand. Thank you. And the second one is, as I know, Grimoire Lab and Augur are both sorts of dashboard projects to deploy the metrics, to show the metrics on the website. But is there any project in CHAOSS trying to improve the metrics automatically, like give notifications to community maintainers to improve responsiveness, or even answer frequently asked questions automatically, something like that?
There is a Augur has a Slack bot that is going to be, I just saw it work last night, so it's going to be released like probably this week, which lets you essentially assign an Augur. You tell the Slack bot where your Augur dashboard is, and then what kinds of notifications you want for which repositories, and it will send you the most anomalous indications in your collection of repositories every day. And you get to tell it the maximum number of anomalous indications you want to get. So if you're monitoring 1,000 repositories, and you say you want 10 messages a day, you'll get the 10 most statistically out of normal indications that occurred in that collection of repositories in a day in a Slack channel that you invite the Slack bot to. There may or may not be a demo of that in the Augur meeting in an hour and a half.
Okay.
I failed to ask my developer to be there for that, so I have to see if I can get them
I thought
up.
the Augur calls were on Thursday.
Oh, maybe it's Thursday. You're right. You're correct. Oh, good. I have a whole day.
You have more than 24 hours to get that demo ready.
I have lost so much track of what day it is through this whole being stuck at home part of life in America right now. Honestly, okay, it's Wednesday. All right. Yeah, you're right. It's tomorrow.
Okay, that's very good. I'll join you tomorrow.
So I can almost guarantee a demo. It's quite late. It's at 11 a.m. It's like 3 hours later than this call, unfortunately. But it is recorded. It is recorded, and those recordings, I generally have been tweeting them out via Augur's Twitter account, and also retweeting them via CHAOSS's Twitter account. And I can give you that info as well.
Okay, thank you.
Was that
Okay, there is a last question. It's personal, and my interest in the open source research is on network analysis. So we don't even use some detailed data. We only use the network structure to analyze some characters of the network, collaboration network. So what project can I join in CHAOSS?
I think I think the value working group has been doing some work in that area. I actually did my dissertation work on network analysis in my first research in open source software used a lot of network analysis. So we have one Google Summer of Code student this summer who is focused on that as well for the Augur project. So I don't know. I haven't been in the value meetings lately, so I don't know what their level of progress is. Don or Matt, do you have a sense of where they're going with network stuff?
Well, I was going to ask a question. What's the goal of doing the network analysis? So what's the hope?
We can find some pattern and some community mode or something like that, and some hidden metrics maybe, not so obvious.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
my PhD was also partly focused on network analysis of open source projects. Seems to be a common thread. So the Grimoire Labs, they have done some. They have some. I forget what they call them. Not the dashboards, but the components, widgets, or whatever. They've had some in the past that have been focused on network analysis that have actually been pretty interesting. So that might be a good place to start. Frankly, what I did for my PhD is I built the database using the Grimoire Labs tools, and then wrote a bunch of queries to get the network analysis data out of those databases. You could do the same thing with Augur. You could download everything into an Augur database and write database queries that pull things out based on whatever network analysis definitions you're using. Because in particular, one of the things I found with a lot of the tools that are targeted more at community managers, the network analysis tends to be relatively rudimentary. And what I found, so I started my PhD in 2015, so the tools were a lot less mature then. But I found that in order to get the measurements that people cared about and were already written up in journals and things like that, that I really had to do a lot of the calculations myself based on database queries that a lot of the tools just weren't quite sophisticated enough.
Yeah, I have a research paper that talks about basically that you have to put the context into the network, that you have to think about what you're asking, and different kinds of participation and reflect different types of connection. And you have to decide what it is you're trying to get at, because an issue contribution network and a commit contribution network may look, and probably do look, very different. And you have to decide if you're aiming to get a holistic picture, or you're aiming to understand the types of people who are connected with each other through these logs. And if you weight each interaction like a commit the same, or if you look at the size of a commit to consider the level of contribution and participation in the network. I mean, I think Don's probably seen a lot of this. Like, if you just take the straight log data, it's too gooey to draw anything useful from.
Okay, thank you.
Frank, I might
join the.
Yeah, listening to this conversation, there might be two working groups that might be applicable. One, I think, is value. So the aim of the value working group is to try to develop metrics that can be used, just to cut to the chase, but to justify engagement in open source. So oftentimes there's a challenge in kind of articulating the value that's generated through open source participation. So the value working group is aiming at developing metrics that can help in that argument internally. And network analysis may help reveal that if we're open sourcing a project, the network that has been created is valuable around this particular piece of open source software. The other is risk. So the risk working group may also have an interest that if you can demonstrate that through network analysis that there's a problem in the network around a particular piece of open source software, that may be interesting as well.
Yeah,
but I think they, like what I understand so far, we work mostly at a higher level of abstraction. Because like if you want to use a network analysis in certain things like what Don have said and all you have contributed, Might be you want to see the betweenness, a homophile, and things like that. It's a very specific area that you are applying. But now the metrics themselves is like a higher level of things that you can consume and interpret it the way you want to make findings. It might also reveal certain things that are not necessarily a problem, but some kind of links that if things works together, if these two components works together, they can come up with high efficiency and things like that. So all those type of analysis will only come after we have well, you can apply the metrics in an open source ecosystem to find whatever your specific goals are. You see, because a particular working group has a focus, like a direction that they define metrics based on how they look at open source and their interest. I don't know if
yeah, I would absolutely, I would agree with that. You know, and the other thing is there might be some opportunity to define some network metrics kind of from scratch, and I think probably the value group is the good place to start there. The other place I would go is the Grimoire Labs meeting as well, so the software group, because I know that they've in the past had some network analysis components, and I'm just not up to date on it, so it might be worth joining that call and asking them as well, or asking on the mailing list.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you all.
Yeah, good questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. All right, any other questions? I'll leave it open. These are great. Thank you for asking these. All right, so just for folks, we're ending these meetings in about 5 minutes. So I think maybe we could spend the last 5 minutes just talking about any agenda items that you might want to see in the next meeting that's in 2 weeks on May 20th. Are there things that you'd like to start talking about in this call? If you'd like to continue to use this call kind of as an update on what's going on in other parts of the CHAOSS project, I'm happy to go any direction here. A bit of both, that's totally fine as well. So I'll leave this open a bit to see if people have thoughts on what they'd like to talk about. Nothing. All right. Then I can set the agenda. So I think from my perspective, I think it's useful to provide people who are on this call kind of a recap of what's been going on the last 2 weeks. Because if the timing is challenging to make the calls during the week, and this one fits well timing wise, I think a summary would be useful for folks, just to kind of tell you the developments that are going on in the working groups, any developments that have been going on software-wise. And I can provide a summary, absolutely no problem on that. We get these summaries in our other community calls, the ones that are a little bit I think less friendly for Asia Pacific. So I can provide that summary, no problem. And then from there, we can always drill into particular areas of interest that you may have, like questions that you have here.
And I would say too that it could be, you know, we can use this meeting however people want to use it. So, you know, if there's stuff that you want more information about, we could, you know, see if we can have an expert come in and talk about a particular topic that you're interested in. If you have some metrics that you've been gathering that you want some feedback on, we could, you know, any of you could do a demo, and we could, you know, as a group sort of brainstorm around it. There are lots of different things we could do with this call if anybody has anything that they want to talk about.
Yeah, I agree with you. So, okay, after the meeting, I will gather their topic, what they're interested in, and what's their focus. And before the next 2 weeks later. Next meeting, I will send it to you, Matt.
Yeah,
Okay.
you could just have, if you could add it, you see the shared document?
Yeah.
Just add it here. Add it at the bottom.
Okay.
Or we can just create a new section for next week and just add the agenda to that.
Yeah.
Or 2 weeks, I guess.
Yep. You can certainly do that. Okay. Good.
Well, thanks everybody. I think this is a
All
really
right.
good first.
Yeah.
I think this is a good first meeting, and
No, thanks
lots of
everyone.
good questions.
I did put some of our media outlets and notes in the chat link, as well as in the notes of the meeting at the top. So like if you want to follow us on Twitter or look at some of the old things on YouTube, or make contributions directly to the working group repos or look through them, there's lots of places to sort of poke around and get started.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see everybody in.
Sean, I just have a quick question, not related to the working group. Are we meeting today?
Yes, Evolution meets
Yeah.
in 10 minutes.